Hello, everyone. After an extended break, this is the professor, and I'm back. Uh, Ran into some creative droughts, ran into a significant project in 2018, uh, ran into a lot of things to think about, and after a pretty extended break, I'm back. I want to thank, of all people, Carol Roth. You can find her on Twitter. She has a podcast called The Roth Effect, and it was an exchange on Twitter that got me thinking about uh, starting to record again and sharing some of these experiences, some of these things I've learned through well over a decade in education. And thanks to Carol, because the idea that popped into my head is the role of cost in student persistence. And this is going to be a little different structure. Previous recordings have tried to be a little more off the cuff. I've tried to provide a little bit more research in this one. So much so that if you're watching the video and not just listening, I've actually prepped a little bit of an outline and I have some references, and I'll provide them as we go through. I want to try to keep this a little bit shorter. This is a topic I could drone on for literally hours, but instead I want to give you a quick hit and talk about really the role of cost in student persistence. People are finally starting to grasp the idea that college might not be for everybody. And I'll start with my story. And even though I was, in quotes, successful in college and graduate school, I didn't really understand the options that were laid out in front of me. So I did well in high school. I went to a small high school. My graduating class was, give or take, about 100 people. I finished in the top 10. Pretty solid high school student. But the scholarship offers didn't really come my way, and I was a small town kid, and I didn't want to go to a big school. In Wisconsin, the big school is the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And people tell you all sorts of horror stories, like there's 100,000 students. I don't think Madison's enrollment is quite that big, but you're constantly told you're going to be stuck in a lecture hall with 400 other students and you're going to get lost in the shuffle. And I didn't want to go to a big school on the East Coast or the West Coast. Truth is, I ended up going to a University of Wisconsin system school, one of the smaller schools in the state. I think they have about a lot of these schools have in the neighborhood of 8 to 10,000 students. I had a little bit of family in the area. I heard it was a good school. I had met and was kind of sort of dating a girl from this city. So really, I fell into my college pick because I had family there and I liked a girl. And oh, by the way, they have a pretty decent science program. Okay, fine. I went into college with the mistaken idea that I was going to be some sort of, oceanographer, and I was going to work with killer whales or something. And you can't go to school for that in Wisconsin. And it became pretty apparent pretty quickly that I'd have to transfer to like Florida State or something. And I didn't want to pay out of state tuition and all this other stuff. So right away from the beginning, money drove my decisions in ways that it maybe shouldn't have. I was afraid of incurring debt. The one decent scholarship I did have was only applicable if I went to a UW system school. So I found myself kind of camped out at this school. And I knew I wanted to study science, but then I had to find a degree along the way. That's not the best way to get yourself through school. Forgive me for pausing here, but it is a little bit emotional as I look back and realize I was spending money for no apparent reason. I was just going to school to get a degree because that's what I thought I was supposed to do. Well, somewhere along the line, I think it was after my freshman year, I had this idea of maybe going to chiropractic school or grad school of some sort. And I decided, okay, I'm going to do that. And I ran over and I talked to my advisor, and he got me set up in what was basically a pre-med program. And I'm taking all these classes, even though I don't really know why I'm taking these classes. I'm just working and saving money and continuing along my education and borrowing money, not really knowing what I want to do at the end. Well, then all of a sudden I finish up and it's time to go to grad school. And I'm filling out all the paperwork, and I'm about 21 years old, and I think I'm pretty smart. And I bought the sell job that the grad school people were giving me. They tell you, yeah, you're going to borrow $100,000, but they make it sound like it's no big deal. Like you're going to pay that off in a couple of years. Okay, great, cool. I want to make money. And the thing is, I look back now and I realize what a catastrophic decision that was, because I made it through undergrad with only about $5,000 in debt. Now, this is the mid-90s, and guys, you know, I try to keep my identity a little secret here. It's dangerous sometimes being a conservative-minded person in academia. But I had finished, $5,000 debt. Okay, that's cool. I could pay that off. I didn't know what I was going to do with that degree because I'd taken myself down the road of a program that could only require me to go to more school. If I'd have been smart, I would have taken classes that would lead me to maybe be able to do something instead of take more school. So that left me primed to swallow the bait from grad school, hook, line, and sinker. And yeah, you're gonna be great, man. You're gonna be in practice. You're easily gonna clear $250K a year. It was too good to be true, but I was too dumb to listen. And so I move across the country. I take up residence in a new state, in a new city where I don't even know anybody, but I'm going to grad school. And the first year is just all science. Hey, I've got a science degree. I already took all these classes. Which, again, it didn't dawn on me that I was paying $10,000 a semester or more to retake classes that I'd pretty much already done. You know, I got a really solid grade in the biochem class that nobody ever got an A in. I got an A no problem because I had just taken biochem 6 months earlier. You know, and I worked through anatomy and physiology, and this is great. Well, then all of a sudden we get to the professional practice stuff and kind of the philosophy of the program. And this is at a chiropractic school. And I'm not agreeing with anything they're selling me. I'm, let's say, 15 months in to, you go year round, it's like a 3.5 year program. So I'm about a little over a third of the way in, 40% of the way in, and I realize I'm in the wrong damn place. And this is where the cost really drives your decisions. I'm sitting there thinking, well, crap, I'm $40,000 in debt. What do I do if I change gears? Do I go to med school? Okay, well, then I'm just starting over because they're not going to take any of these classes. And I'm going to have to pay all this money back. And I'm going to be even further behind the 8 ball. Maybe I just stay here and practice the way I want. Well, what if I go to school and just, decide I want to be a teacher or a lab tech or something? Well, I'm never going to be able to pay all that money back. And then it hits me. I'm stuck. I've borrowed all this money. And again, I got out of undergrad, only like $5,000 in debt. But here I am a year later, with interest, well over $50,000 in debt. So I have to stay in school and I have to finish. And I realized I was probably going to fail in practice because I didn't want to do that. And then, of course, you borrow all that money and you get out of school and it causes you to make even more bad decisions. You take jobs you shouldn't take. You stay in jobs you shouldn't stay in. Maybe you get chided into buying a business or opening your own clinic and then piling more debt on top of it with no way of ever really getting out And then somewhere along the line, that first bill from the government comes and says, oh, by the way, your monthly check or your monthly bill for your loan is $1,800, $2,000, $2,400. And you're thinking, I'm not even making $2,400 a month. How am I going to pay the government back? And so I want you to avoid the mistakes that I made and understand that the industry is not set up to get you out without debt. I don't care if you're going for an associate's program, like a diploma type program, like if you want to be in like medical assisting or, you know, like a certified medical assistant, let's say, or like a certified nursing assistant. You know, those are shorter programs. The programs are, and don't get me wrong, a lot of good people are in the schools. They want you to get out. They want you to do well. But the way it is set up, it's, the word in my mind is Ouroboros, the snake that eats its own tail. That's what academics is. They want to get as much money out of you so they can get as much money out of the next person. And we'll talk about that in a minute. So you're in school, you're in debt, and that debt drives progress and persistence. Persistence is a big word. We'll talk about that in a few seconds here. I see we're already bumping against 11 and a half minutes. As always, the professor is long-winded. I apologize. So you realize, in my case, you can't walk away. For me, that dollar amount was 40 or 50K. For you, it might be 4 or 5K. You'd be a lot smarter than I was. You look at that number and go, I can't walk away. Here's where things get tricky. If you follow academic circles at all, you will have heard of this thing called gainful employment, or the gainful employment legislation. I pulled a section out of Wikipedia. Pretty easy to find. Just search gainful employment law on Wikipedia. I know I rail all the time in my classes about Wikipedia, but for general research stuff like this, it's good. Gainful employment rule is a highly controversial rule proposed by the Obama administration in 2010. The purpose of the rule is to create career colleges and training programs that better prepare students for gainful employment. Okay, that's not really it, but we'll get to that in a minute. In order to determine if programs prepare students for gainful employment, the Department of Ed intends to measure the relationship between the debt students incur and their incomes after completing a program, as well as the rate at which program enrollees pay their loans. Sounds good. We'll explain in a minute. If a program graduates a large share of students with a high debt-to-income ratio, the program may be ineligible to participate in future student funding. Opponents argue against gainful employment because it proposes to eliminate or limit financial aid to students if their projected earnings after graduation do not meet a certain debt-to-income ratio. Okay, let's look at the good side first, because there was good that came out of this. There were a lot of programs out there, especially in the private for-profit sector, where it was built on just extracting every red cent they could. And there's a relationship between the schools and the accreditors. And the accreditors say, if you want to give your students a degree in underwater basket weaving, they need this many credits of underwater, this many credits of basket weaving, this many credits of financial literacy, etc., etc. Well, schools, being financial institutions, said, well, if 3 credits is good, 4 credits is better. If 4 credits is better, 6 credits is freaking awesome. And so you had a lot of programs that were bloated. For example, and we'll talk about this again in a few minutes. This is going to end up being way longer than we wanted. But state schools, which you'll notice are not mentioned in the law, have a role with determining what goes into their programs. And it's why a 4-year degree can now take upwards of 6 years to get. Again, more on that later. One of my favorite sayings. Anyway, the positive part of gainful employment was getting these programs, especially lower level programs, associates programs, and lower, to trim the fat. So instead of having, a 95 credit program, now it's only an 80 credit program, which is what it should have been to begin with, for example. The problem is the calculations for income to debt are really aggressive. And in order to be eligible to stay in the program and for the school to stay eligible, you got to move through these programs really quickly. So there is, shall we say, a little bit of undue pressure to keep students enrolled and keep them moving along. It really drives home the value in students passing a class the first time they take it, or being really, really, truly permissive if students encounter problems. And so students maybe aren't getting the most out of their classes. Educators are being pressured to maybe not make sure students are learning all this stuff. It sets up a system aimed specifically at the private and private for-profit sectors to really kind of clamp down. And it was a little underhanded in that it did aim to pull money away from some of these private schools. And oh, by the way, now there's more money to go to the state schools. And who do the state schools, hang out with? Who are they in bed with? Well, state and federal legislators. Where do, the state and federal legislators get a lot of their campaign finance money from? Well, they get a good chunk from the teachers groups, whether it's the high school or grade school teachers and their unions, or the university professors. There's a relationship there, is what I'm saying. And I think we all know it exists. And this law was specifically targeting the private universities, not the public universities. It was an anti-competition law. The wording is pretty clear. It does not mention anything to do with state universities. And if we're going to be honest here, and I want to be practical as well, providing exams, why does a four-year state university have, for example, a ballet program? Where I went to school, they had a ballet program, when literally none of their dancers were employed by large companies such as the Milwaukee Ballet. Milwaukee Ballet is not a massive ballet company, but they're a pretty good sized company, and they've employed some pretty famous dancers. My dog is barking because he does not like the mention of ballet, apparently. But if you wanted to work for that company, you would come up through their program instead of getting a 4-year degree, or a 4-year university having an abstract art degree. It seems like if you want to do abstract art, you would either go to an art institute or just do your art. And again, I don't mean to pick on the arts here. There is value in the arts, but my concern is asking students to borrow $40,000, $50,000, $75,000 when there are less expensive and more productive ways of studying their craft. If you want to be a plumber, you take some classes and then you become an apprentice and you learn the trade, on the job training. You learn from a master. If you want to be a ballet dancer, you join a company and you're part of the corps, and then maybe you work your way up and become a feature, and eventually maybe you become a soloist. That's how it works. You don't go to school and get a 4-year degree in ballet and then expect to be the headliner at the Chicago or the Milwaukee Ballet. It just doesn't work that way. Anyway, we are all over the place here. If you want to know more about gainful employment, you can look it up. I also pulled up some stuff on studentaid.ed.gov. There have been some changes to the program through the Trump administration and Betsy DeVos. I pulled up an article on InsideHigherEd.com about dropping gainful employment means profits keep billions, student aid. The point of the article there is that for-profit schools are keeping more money. They're given more freedom, but the truth of the matter is schools are still afraid. They're afraid this is going to come back. So if Donald Trump loses in 2020, or if there's a Democrat president, or overwhelming majorities in the House and Senate in 2020 or 2024, something like this could come back, and the schools are afraid. Even as this gets rolled back, schools are afraid that somebody at the Department of Ed is watching them. And again, oversight is good, but oversight aimed at limiting competition or favoring one sector over another, that's anti-open market, and that's not appropriate. On ed.gov, I also found a press release citing that there's a proposed expansion to include all schools. There we go. This is what has the state schools terrified, because now they would have to report what their students do as well. And if you're turning out baccalaureate students who can't get jobs, or have jobs that are only good for going to more school, or jobs that don't really exist, and this is where some of the criticism of the grievance studies folks come in. Those are people who just kind of, I'm oversimplifying here, but complain for a living but don't necessarily work for anyone. That's not going to reflect well on the state schools. And so there is some movement there, but obviously the state schools don't want anybody taking a real close look at where the money is going. Something to think about as well, and this is now from my role as an administrator in a university setting, we don't get to know what students are doing prior to coming to us. So in the so-called career college sector, in the so-called career college sector, you have a subpopulation of students. And there's no easy way to say this, but they just jump from school to school and cash checks. They enroll, they borrow as much money as they can, they take max loans, and quite frankly, most of them don't attend a day of class. So if your school has a 2-week attendance policy, they will log in or show up every 13 days, every 14 days. So they'll show up to class on day 1, day 15, day 29, etc., to avoid being withdrawn. And they will stay with you as long as possible and borrow as much money as possible until you kick them out. And if you're at University X, you're not able to see what the student did or what they borrowed or what their behavior was at University A, B, C, D. And there are students who make a career of this. And yes, there is a lifetime borrowing cap, but it takes a while to catch up. And these students just keep doing it. And so you, the faithful, well-intentioned, dedicated student, you end up paying for those students because the university obviously has to charge enough to cover all the expenses, and whether it's student tracking software or student services specialists or even just the paperwork that goes into finally kicking these people out, you have to pay for that. Every draconian rule exists because somebody screwed up. So there is the inability to view history, and they just keep borrowing. Department of Ed has also kind of made it harder for us to catch these students in process, because a lot of times they'll try to withhold information so they can technically borrow money before all their paperwork is in. I have experience in the online world, and you have students will sign up for your classes, and during the registration phase, they'll say, "I don't have a computer. I'm just waiting for my first disbursement." and then I'm going to buy a computer. Well, that computer never gets purchased. And so on it goes, and eventually they get kicked out, and then they go to the next school and do it again. Another reason behind cost kind of driving the commitment here is the idea of competing ideologies. And this doesn't necessarily tie into our original idea, but it is important. And that is retention versus competency. In my role, I deal with a couple different programmatic accreditors. And one says, I'm oversimplifying, but we don't care if they learn a damn thing. You just better graduate 70% of them. We have a similar but different program that says we don't care how many of them you fail, they just better pass this exam, this board or this licensure exam at the end. We don't care if you fail 99% of them. They need to be competent. Shout out to all the nursing type programs out there. They're the latter. They don't care. I shouldn't say they don't care. It's less important what your pass rate is so long as the students you crank out are competent. Because obviously they're going to be dealing with people's lives. Taking blood, giving medication, etc. But there are other programs who really have told us there's no exam at the end. You just have to retain 70% of them. So schools get forced into this shell game, basically begging these students to stay enrolled, or maybe you do a conditional pre-degree enrollment and they don't get enrolled into program X until they pass their first science course or their first math course, whatever it may be. But as soon as these students are officially declared into this program, we have to pass 70% of them. Or we risk losing our accreditation. Or we get put on the no-no list and they want to audit us X times a year. Again, it doesn't matter if they learn anything, you just have to graduate them. So then we have to, as the university, in order to keep our good standing, have to, just beg and hound and tutor and coach and really beg and plead these students to show up and attend class and to keep moving along. And if they don't, we have to have a paper trail a mile long that says, no, really, it's not our fault. They just never came to class. That's why they failed. A lot of universities have student tracking programs. It might be web-based. It might be through their learning management system. But they all have a way to track everything you've done to try to keep, as I call them, ghosts, because they're a name in your grade center, but you don't ever see them. We have to try to keep these ghosts engaged. And then when the accreditors come, we can go, see, look, here's 147,000 lines of data about how we really sincerely tried to keep the student enrolled. That needs to change. Competency-based learning and competency-based accreditation is where it should be. And if the Department of Ed really cared, if the federal government really cared, they would encourage these accreditors to get out of the retention game. Because, especially when we're talking about, medical fields or chemistry, areas where people can get hurt or die or poisoned or sickened, you don't want someone who did the bare minimum to get by and was just retained long enough to get their degree. You want someone who can demonstrate the competency. And then finally, there's the idea of cost controls. This morning on Twitter, I saw somebody write, why does college cost so damn much? And really, it was when the universities got in bed with the Department of Ed and the federal dollars. When the federal government said, well, we think you should be able to borrow up to $10,000 a year for college. Guess what college started to cost? $10,000 a year. Or a little bit more, because then we get some cash out of the student and their family too. And now you have this Ouroboros snake that devours its own tail relationship where the schools work with the federal government to set programmatic requirements and to recommend what their students need in terms of educational funding. And then they drive the students to borrow as much as possible and maximize their income. So school costs $10,000 a semester. You get your $9,000 or $10,000 that you're able to borrow. Plus you've got to come up with money to live and books and everything else. And then at the end of the fiscal year, the school goes back to the Department of Ed and says, boy, our students are really having a tight time at $10,000 a semester. Maybe they should borrow $12,000 a semester. And then the feds go, oh yeah, you're right. You should be able to borrow $12,000 a semester. That's a good idea. And then the state schools turn around and say, well, the cost of the dorms just went up by $500, or meal plans just went up by $250, or now you need to take this gender studies equality class that's now mandatory for all degrees, and that's a 4-credit class, and it's going to cost you $18.50 or whatever the cost is for a class now. And it's this back and forth where schools say we need more money, feds give more money, so the schools say they need more money again. You notice how tuition never goes down. Schools have started to cut some of their less profitable programs. Where I went to school, they've cut some of the art programs and some of the so-called soft science courses. But they've expanded the hard science programs because, well, those people get jobs, but they can also use technology to drive the cost. Oh my goodness, we are at 31 minutes. I never wanted to go this long, but obviously this is something that is important and I wanted to share with all of you. So look for more stuff to come from me. I want to start recording more often. I've talked to some folks about maybe doing some podcasts. That is obviously a fantasy. I know I need to work on my presentation. I need to work on my editing skills. Right now, I just want this to be a low fidelity, low tech. Mostly I put it on YouTube because that's the tool available. Mostly it's just audio only. If you have questions, hit me up. And really just have a great day and make smart decisions, okay? Take care, everybody, and be well.